Thank you so much, Mr. Desai, for taking out the time to join us on Tehelka today. What we're going to be talking about is basically what's been in the news for quite some time now. You have two editors from the Z Group who have been arrested for allegedly bribing the Jindal Group, and their bail has been denied. And on the other side, you have the Jindal Group, which, according to the Z organization, offered them the bribe first. Now, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, without getting into the specifics of that individual episode, because it is murky, in every which way. I mean, you look at it. But I think the fact that such instances have been rumored to have existed for a while, and here you have evidence that that kind of conversation does take place. As to who is to blame, how much, is something that will get determined, in the due course of time. But the fact that clearly there is culpability on the face of it on both sides, that you are willing to have a conversation like that, and there's somebody else who engages in this kind of which, if it is proved, it will be nothing but extortion. I mean, there is no running away from what it represents. And there's been whispers, and more than whispers, in fact, for a long time now, whether it has to do with the whole election packages that have been rumored to be run by a lot of media organizations, and running through the whole spectrum into the blurring of lines between editorial and advertising. So that there is a whole area there. But I think this is the darker side of that spectrum, where there is a very specific kind of a demand that apparently has been made, and a conversation has been engaged with, which I think is a very troubling aspect of what is happening in media today.
At the end of the day, the media is a business. Someone might be running a newspaper, might be running a television channel, but for them it's not a charitable organization. It is about running a business. And do you think that's where some of the problems do come in, that when a business is about profit and loss, and when you're dealing with things like the news, if you're more sensational or if you push an agenda, it's possible for you to get in more revenue, make more money, and that's where the sort of editorial versus marketing divide comes in, and the morals versus business divide comes in.
I think so. I think in some ways the fact that when you start looking at media primarily through the lens of it being a business, that's when you have a problem. When it becomes a listed entity, and therefore you have quarterly pressures, that's when all the issues about business, which in some ways be well business, but perhaps don't have the same kind of consequences. That there's an epidemic, if you like, of short-termism, where you're looking only till the next quarter and the next and the next and so on. And therefore, you could argue that most media brands and journalism brands have a long-term loss that is implicit in any compromise that they make in the short term. That eventually these are businesses that run on trust and credibility, and when you compromise those, eventually something will give. But eventually is a long time away, and does not necessarily therefore color the actions of business houses. And I think that's at some level, if you go back in time, you'll find that journalism was always a business. There were always bills to be paid. There was always some profit, perhaps, hopefully, to be made. But most of the people who entered this did not do so for reasons of profit. And that's the fundamental difference that you see, that when you enter this as a business for reasons of profit, then your fidelity to the nature of the profession that translates into the business gets diluted. And I think that's what we've seen. Even now, thanks to the fact that we have, on the whole, a remarkably committed set of journalists that are still at the helm of affairs, is that when we haven't seen a descent into a complete sort of a commercialism. But who is to say that is not going to happen in the future? So to that extent, I do think that the corporatization of media, it's being seen primarily as a business, being subject to the same pressures of business, increasingly being populated by people who see it as a business, who become the decision makers rather than the editorial. I think these are a whole set of reasons why it is going down the path that it is.
You earlier mentioned that the media is slowly becoming about entertainment, and there are many channels that have taken that path of TRPs, spicing things up. Do you think at some level a moral line is being crossed where you're pushing facts in a certain way to get in the ratings?
No, I see there is a line that is crossed when you present what is meant to be, a fact as and then dress it up. The primary issue here is the fact that the moment I think of this as a marketing product, my interest shifts from what I think has happened, which admittedly comes with its own biases. There is no objective reporting of any kind that is, possible in a strictest sense. But here what you are asking is, what do you want to hear? The moment my primary consideration is what you want to hear, then news you order through the frame of who is your watcher or who's your reader. So your interest in the world narrows to that of mirroring the constituency that you cater to. To that constituency, your tonality changes because you increasingly start looking at the viewer. And I find it interesting that in television you refer to the viewer as an eyeball. So you actually reduce the full-bloodedness of individuals into a synaptic response. Okay, the flickering of the eyeball is what you are after. That is reduction of the complexity of the world to stimulation, which is almost electronic. That's a dramatic compression, of interest that has happened. And I think that's, if that is what you are after, you will create a hyper-simulated, where you increasingly look at reality as material, source material, to build a story with, and increasingly in more stimulated kind of versions. We are seeing that, and again, structurally, unless there is a fundamental difference, why would that change? The only thing you would expect with any market, and which is where I think in India we have not yet seen that, is that markets get stratified, and the market can find within itself certain ends that value reportage of a different kind. When we come to news, it's true for everything, that you will value refined experiences. You will want to be treated more intelligently. So as the market evolves, the broad base of the market should, in theory, give rise and give way to strata of differentiated consumers looking for different experiences. I don't think we've seen that too much, but for instance, you could argue that in the magazine space, you're beginning to see some. You look at, say, some of the music programming that you see in the entertainment space, you're beginning to see a pulling away from absolute, say, the Bollywoodization that we've seen for so. So, to me, one is there is some hope perhaps for the market to find its better self, and therefore, currently the easy equation of anything commercial with a loss of quality, that automatic connection might give way. So that, to me, is one source perhaps of change that you will see tomorrow. The other is some regulation that kind of at least eliminates some of the gross distortions. But within that, I think this trend would continue.